Hi everybody, this is Oksana, and today I wanted to talk to you about mineral makeup and the danger that it poses to your health due to inhalation, you breathing in the powder. And I also wanted to talk about some ways of getting around that, some ways of coping with it, because of course mineral makeup is such a big part of natural makeup, and it'd be, extremely difficult to just give up all mineral makeup that is in the form of powder. So I just kind of wanted to talk about it, like have a little discussion with you guys, because it's something that I've been thinking about for a long time too, and kind of researching for a long time as well. So two big ingredients that are very often found in mineral makeup are titanium dioxide and zinc oxide, and mica as well. But especially the first two, titanium and zinc, are actually rated not that safely on Skin Deep. Like, I know we usually look for the green rating to be in the green, and I think a 0 and a 1 is in the green. I'm not sure about a 2, it might be, but then the next area is kind of that like yellowish orange, and they both are that, and I forget exactly their specific rating, because it's not actually one number, it's more of like a range. I think one is 2 to 3 and one is 1 to 3 or something like that. But basically, the reason it is a range is because it depends on usage. So if you use those minerals in a certain way, then they're safe, and if you breathe them in, then they're not safe, especially nanoparticles. So that's one big thing, is avoiding nanoparticles, which a lot of natural companies, they're aware of that, and they'll write, or they'll at least tell you if you ask them, that we don't use nanoparticles. And I often contact companies if it's a company that I'm not really sure whether they use nanoparticles. Like recently I was talking to Physicians Formula because I use their organic wear line, their CC and BB cream, and they confirmed for me that they do not use nanoparticles in those products. Even though those are not a powder, they're a liquid, there's still some concern about them being absorbed through your skin. But when it is a powder, it's even more dangerous, because you're breathing in the nanoparticles, and they kind of can get pretty deeply into your lungs, because they're such tiny, tiny microscopic particles. But even if your makeup is not nanoparticles, it's still, quite dangerous and not very good for your health to breathe it in. So what can you do about it? The first thing is obviously not use a loose powder. Use liquid or cream foundation, or even a pressed foundation. Now, pressed foundation, I do feel like there's a little bit more risk there than there is with liquid or cream, because once you dip your brush in it, especially if it's nice and soft, it just kind of breaks the powder right up, and it is on your brush. Sometimes they can even kick up a little bit of powder when you're, dipping your brush in there. So it releases the powder into the air, and then when you're putting it on, it's kind of floating around in the air. It's some of the tiny particles that you can't really see, and you're potentially breathing them in. Now, I do think that pressed is safer than loose, since it doesn't like kick up as much powder as loose can. So there's a little bit less for you to breathe in, but I do think that it is a concern. And something that I have been doing for a really long time is just holding my breath when I'm applying powder, loose powder, or even pressed powder. When I'm powdering my face, I just hold my breath. And it can be a little difficult, because sometimes it's not as simple as, do, you're done. Sometimes, you need to buff a powder, in, and it takes some time, and, you build it up in layers. So what I like to do is, I'll take a deep breath, I'll hold my breath, and there'll be more techniques than this. Don't worry, there's other things too. It's not just like, oh, hold your breath when you're putting on your powder, but I will, go ahead, apply it, and then when I feel like, I need to take a breath, again, because I've been holding it in for, for as long as I can, what I do is I walk away from the area where I'm applying it. So I'm usually applying it in my bathroom in front of the mirror. So I'll go ahead and, I'll put my brush down, I'll walk away, I'll walk like into my bedroom, and I'll go ahead and I'll take a breath, you know, and I'll hold it again, I'll come back, put it on, and repeat as much as necessary. And the reason I do that is since I'm putting the powder on, it's kind of all floating around in the air around me. And so when I kind of walk away from that. And also just the, you know, when you're walking, you can kind of feel the air move this way as you move forward. And so I'm hoping most of the loose powder that's in the air that I can't see kind of gets left behind on my way to kind of walk away. And then I take a breath of hopefully clean air with nothing in it. So that's what I had been doing for a really long time. But of course there's other ways as well, if that is something that, you know, is inconvenient for you to do, or, you know, maybe you need to touch up in public or something and, you know, you don't really want to do that. So there's other ways as well. One thing is to spray your face before as well as after, or, you know, either before or after. So when you spray your face before, the moisture from, you know, say it's George's Aloe Spray, or there's like a what is that, caffeinated makeup primer that I really like. It's like green stations or something. So whenever your face is kind of a little moist, and there's even some moisture in the air from the spraying happening, the powder, it gets heavy when it gets wet. So instead of, you know, flying around all loosely, it either sticks to your face, or I feel like it kind of like sinks, like it gets wet and falls down, you know. There's not as much of it floating around when the air is moist and when your face is moist. And then same thing afterwards. If there's any kind of loose powder still not super adhered to your skin, especially like all around your nose area, and every time you breathe in, think of, you know, there's a layer of powder right here, so you're breathing in, that powder might be lifting up a little bit and you're breathing it in because it's right there. So spraying it and wetting it down kind of makes it less likely to become airborne and more likely to just stay on your skin and stick to your skin. So that's why spraying it down is really helpful. Another thing is, I will link my video below, but I have this technique of infusing your powder with an oil that basically involves using a mortar and pestle or like a little grinder to add just a few drops of oil to your loose powder. Not enough to make it not a loose powder anymore, but enough to make it a little kind of creamier feeling and maybe a little clumpier than the way it was before. And this is especially helpful with some really dry, really fine feeling powders. Like I feel like some powder makeup, like Lucy's, is naturally kind of heavy and creamy and not as likely to just fly everywhere. And some powders like Meow Cosmetics, I feel like their powder is like a little lighter. And so when you are adding an oil to it and you kind of disperse it evenly throughout, your powder becomes a little heavier and a little, you know, less likely to just fly everywhere. Now it still does a little bit because it's still a loose powder, but if you want to do that extra step, if it's something that you know, will help you in other ways as well, because it makes it a little more wearable for dry skin as well when you infuse your powder with oil, it's, you know, it's going to help with it, with you breathing it in and with it flying everywhere as well. So that's another kind of little thing you can do. I already touched upon pressed powder, but you can press your own powder, which reduces a little bit of, you know, how likely it is to just fly around in the air, makes it a little heavier, but it still doesn't quite solve the problem. And of course you can make your powder into a liquid by mixing it with either, you know, water or an oil or aloe. I know that's a thing, people mixing their foundation with aloe and then applying it and making kind of a do-it-yourself liquid foundation. My skin is kind of dry, so anything that is just like pure water or pure aloe doesn't really work for me. I have mixed powder minerals with oil, just a few drops of oil before, and that actually works fairly well if you have dry skin. You can do both aloe and oil and then a little bit of powder and mix that up. You can experiment. It really depends on your skin, what is going to work best for you. You can even try mixing powder into a moisturizer or like a tinted moisturizer or a sunscreen or something. Again, it really varies depending on the actual specific products that you're using, but that's definitely something that's worth a try. So if you can turn your loose powder into a, you know, not loose product, that will help, of course, as well. And you can apply your powder moist or wet. You can make a spray, either, you know, just a ready-made spray like George's Aloe, or I really like to have just a little bit of oil in there, so I like to do George's Aloe with a little bit of like fractionated coconut oil, or, you know, your oil of choice in a spritzer bottle, and shake that up to mix the oil and the water, and then spray that onto your brush so that when you're picking out the powder, it is automatically getting wet and sticking to your brush and not flying in the air, and then you're applying it to your face. It's going to feel a little damp, so it's going to almost look like a wet, like a liquid foundation or a cream foundation when you're applying it. And you can do this with a loose powder or a pressed powder. However, with a pressed powder, I find that depending on the pressed powder, some of them will get a crust on top. If you're sticking a wet brush in there, it'll kind of form a crust and you'll have to scrape it off, and you know, kind of not ruin your pressed foundation, but just kind of, you know, make it unusable until you scrape that crust off of it. So you can do the same thing with a beauty blender sponge. You can spray that mix onto it, or you can just dampen it with regular water and squeeze the water out and just use a damp sponge to apply your foundation. That's a little less likely to form a crust on a pressed powder because it's just going to have water in there, versus when it has the oil, I feel like that really forms that crust on a pressed powder. But water, it works a little better. And it also depends on the foundation, because some of my foundations will do this, you know, crust, but then the baked powder that I have, the Color Tones baked powder, I think I even have a video where I'm applying it wet with a beauty blender, and that works really well. It doesn't form that crust on it, it doesn't ruin the powder at all, and it applies, you know, really nicely with a sponge. And that particular powder actually doesn't have the titanium or the zinc oxide in it. Not that there's anything wrong with those two ingredients, but they're just rated a little more highly, like they're a little extra dangerous if you breathe them in. And mica is rated a 1, even though you can just as easily breathe in mica, but I guess it's not as bad for you if you breathe it in. I don't know, but it's rated more safely for whatever reason. But either way, I try to avoid, you know, breathing in any powder. But if you wanted a foundation that only has mica and doesn't have the titanium or the zinc, then that baked Color Tones powder that I bought mine from Makeup Alley, that is a choice that you have. So that's pretty much it. I just wanted to share some ideas with you, some tips and tricks that I've come up with to reduce, you know, your risk of inhaling any mineral cosmetic powder. Of course, the risk is greatest with a foundation or a setting powder. With eyeshadow, I feel like it doesn't really go anywhere as much, and it's kind of a smaller risk because you're just putting a tiny bit on your eye, and I like to press on my eyeshadows anyways. So that's it. I just wanted to share this with you, just some thoughts of mine, some tips and tricks. I'm not saying mineral powder makeup is bad. I love it. I use it. It's a great, safe alternative to a lot of traditional makeups that are filled with chemicals, but just if you're going to be using a loose powder, I just wanted to share some kind of tips and tricks to reduce your chance of inhaling it, to make it even safer for yourself. So that's it. Hopefully you find this video helpful, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.